The purple sky of Kepler 442b burned with orange flames as the last Zaphirian defense ship fell from the clouds. Captain Lyra Vex-9 watched through the cracked view screen of her command bridge as her homeworld died piece by piece. The beautiful, crystal cities that had taken her people 1,000 years to build were now nothing but glowing ruins on the horizon. The Vorthak machines had been here for 3 months. They came in ships that looked like floating metal triangles, cold and perfect in their design. No one knew where they came from or why they chose worlds to destroy. They just appeared one day and began taking everything apart piece by piece like children breaking toys to see what was inside. Lyra's ship, the Star of Kepler, was the last military vessel still fighting. All the others had been turned into scrap metal by the Vorthak weapons. Her crew of 40 had been reduced to 12 scared young soldiers who looked to her for answers she did not have. The ship's hull had holes in 17 places, and the life support systems were failing. "Captain," called out her communications officer, a thin young male named Dex. "The quantum transmitter is still working, but not for much longer." Lyra closed her 4 eyes and tried to think. The Zaphirians were a peaceful race. They had never fought wars like some other species. Their weapons were designed for hunting the large beasts that roamed their purple plains, not for fighting an enemy that could destroy entire planets. They had tried to negotiate with the Vorthak, but the machines did not seem to understand the concept of surrender or mercy. "Captain, what are your orders?" asked her tactical officer, a female named Zara whose left arm was wrapped in bloody bandages. Lyra looked around her bridge at the young faces staring at her. These soldiers had families hiding in the deep caves beneath the planet's surface. Parents and children and grandparents huddled together in the dark, waiting for news that would never come. The Vorthak machines were already digging into the caves with their harvesting tools. "Prepare a general distress signal," Lyra said finally. "Send it on all frequencies, as far as our transmitter can reach." Dex's fingers moved across his control panel, setting up the transmission equipment. "Ready, Captain. What message should we send?" Lyra stood up from her command chair, her tall blue form casting shadows in the red emergency lighting of the bridge. She had never imagined she would have to make a decision like this. The Zaphirians had always believed they were alone in this part of the galaxy. They had never tried to contact other species before. "Record this message," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her heart. "To any intelligent life forms receiving this transmission, this is Captain Lyra Vex-9 of the Zaphirian Defense Fleet. Our world is under attack by machines that call themselves the Vorthak Collective. They are destroying everything on our planet and killing our people." She paused as another explosion rocked the ship. Through the view screen, she could see more Vorthak ships descending from orbit like metal birds of prey. "We have tried to fight them, but our weapons are not strong enough. We have tried to negotiate, but they do not respond to our communications. Our military forces have been defeated. Our children are hiding in caves, while death machines strip our world bare. We estimate that our species has approximately 60 rotations before complete extinction." Lyra's voice broke slightly as she continued. "If there exists any civilization capable of mercy, any species with the power to help, we beg for your intervention. We have nothing to offer in return except our gratitude and the knowledge that you saved an entire world from destruction. Please help us. Our coordinates are included in this transmission." She nodded to Dex, who began transmitting the message across 47 different radio frequencies, sending it deep into unexplored space where it might reach ears they had never imagined could exist. The signal traveled through the void at the speed of light, reaching the listening posts of various alien civilizations across the galaxy. On the trade station of New Sarn, a communications officer received the message and filed it under irrelevant local conflicts. The Grimlock Empire's military command heard the plea and dismissed the Zaphirians as weaklings not worth saving. A research station run by the peaceful Centauri noted the transmission and debated for 3 days whether they had any obligation to respond to the cry for help. But far away, in a small solar system that most aliens had never bothered to explore, the signal reached a blue and green planet where a species called humans had recently developed faster-than-light communication technology. Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan was working the night shift at Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Station, a facility built on the dark side of the moon. Jake was 32 years old, with short brown hair and the kind of tired eyes that came from spending too many hours staring at computer screens. He had been monitoring space communications for the Global Earth Alliance for 7 years, mostly listening to radio signals from nearby stars and cataloging them for the science department. At 3 a.m, Earth time, Jake's computers detected an unusual transmission from the direction of the constellation Lyra. The signal was clearly artificial, structured in a way that suggested intelligent origin, but it was in a language that Earth's translation programs had never encountered before. Jake leaned forward in his chair and began running the signal through every decryption and translation algorithm in the database. The computer systems worked for 6 hours, analyzing patterns and cross-referencing linguistic structures with known alien languages. Jake drank 4 cups of coffee and watched the progress bars slowly fill up on his monitors. When the translation finally appeared on his screen, Jake felt the coffee mug slip from his hand and shatter on the floor. He read the message 3 times before his hand stopped shaking enough to reach for the secure communication line that connected directly to Sol Defense Command. Admiral Kate Morrison was having breakfast in her quarters aboard the Orbital Defense platform when her personal communicator buzzed with an emergency signal. Kate was 55 years old, a career military officer who had commanded Earth space forces since humanity had first ventured beyond the solar system. She had gray hair pulled back in a regulation bun and the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. "This better be important, Sullivan," she said as Jake's face appeared on her view screen. "Admiral, you need to see this immediately," Jake said, his voice tight with tension. "We've received a distress call from an alien species. They're facing extinction and asking for help." Kate set down her coffee and leaned forward. In the 8 years since humanity had achieved faster-than-light travel, they had encountered evidence of other intelligent species but had never received direct communication from any of them. "Send me the full transmission, Lieutenant Commander." The message took 20 minutes for Kate to read completely, including the technical data about the Zaphirian homeworld and the nature of the threat they faced. When she finished, she sat back in her chair and stared at the wall for a long moment. Earth was not a major power in the galaxy. Humanity had only 12 interstellar ships, all of them designed for scientific research rather than military operations. The human military was built for fighting other humans on Earth, not for space warfare against alien machines. By any logical standard, Earth could not help the Zaphirians. But Kate Morrison had not become Admiral of Sol Defense Command by accepting logical limitations. She opened a secure channel to the Global Earth Alliance headquarters and requested an immediate emergency session with President Lisa Chen and the Defense Council. The debate that followed would determine whether humanity would take its first step onto the galactic stage as saviors or continue to hide in the shadows of an indifferent universe. The emergency session of the Global Earth Alliance Defense Council lasted exactly 47 minutes. President Lisa Chen sat at the head of the long table in the secure meeting room beneath Geneva, looking at the faces of the 12 most powerful people on Earth. Military commanders, science advisors, and political leaders all stared at the translated alien message displayed on the room's main screen. "The question before us is simple," President Chen said, her voice calm despite the weight of the decision. "Do we respond to this call for help, or do we ignore it and hope the galaxy doesn't notice we exist?" General Marcus Webb, head of Earth's conventional military forces, shook his head. "Madam President, we have 12 research ships and no weapons designed for space combat. We cannot fight alien war machines with scientific equipment." Admiral Kate Morrison leaned forward in her chair. "General Webb is correct about our limitations, but he's wrong about our capabilities. Earth may not have energy weapons or particle shields, but we have something these aliens have never encountered." "Which is what exactly?" asked Dr. Patricia Hill, the President's science advisor. Kate smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "We have the 1st Terran Shock Battalion." The room fell silent. Everyone at the table knew about the Shock Battalion, though few would admit it publicly. It was Earth's most classified military unit, composed of soldiers who were considered too dangerous for regular service. They were volunteers recruited from prisons, special forces washouts, and the kind of people who thrived in situations that would break normal human beings. You want to send our criminals and psychopaths to represent humanity's first contact with alien civilization? Asked Foreign Minister James Carter. I want to send our best killers to save an entire species from extinction, Kate replied. The shock battalion exists because sometimes the right tool for the job is a monster with a conscience. President Chen studied the Admiral's face. Kate Morrison had been a soldier for 35 years, and she had never made a recommendation without careful thought. Tell me about your plan, Admiral. Kate stood up and activated the room's holographic display system. A three-dimensional map of local space appeared above the table, showing Earth's position relative to the Zaphirian homeworld. The EAS Retribution is our newest research vessel, but it was built with modular design principles. We can retrofit, with weapons and military equipment in 72 hours. It has the range to reach the Zaphirian system, and the speed to get there before their deadline. And then what? Asked General Webb. One ship against an entire alien fleet? Then, we introduce the galaxy to human warfare, Kate said. The shock battalion doesn't fight fair. They don't follow the rules of civilized combat. They turn every situation into chaos and find ways to win when winning should be impossible. Dr. Hill pulled up the technical specifications for the Vorthak, ships that the Zaphirians had included in their distress call. These machines appear to be highly logical and predictable. They follow tactical patterns based on maximum efficiency. They've never encountered an enemy that doesn't behave rationally. Exactly, Kate said. The shock battalion specializes in irrational warfare. They turn furniture into weapons and use maintenance tunnels as attack routes. They fight like humans, have always fought, with creativity, desperation, and complete disregard for personal safety. President Chen looked around the table at the faces of her advisors. Some looked skeptical, others appeared thoughtful, and a few seemed genuinely excited by the possibility. The political implications are enormous. If we succeed, we announce humanity's presence to the entire galaxy. If we fail, we may have doomed our own species. Madam President, Kate said quietly, if we do nothing, we condemn 6 billion innocent people to death. That's not the kind of galaxy I want humanity to join. The vote was unanimous. 72 hours later, the EAS Retribution launched from Luna Station with a crew of 47 and a cargo hold full of equipment that would have made most civilized species question humanity's sanity. The ship had been designed as a deep space research vessel, but Admiral Morrison's engineers had worked around the clock to transform it into something entirely different. Colonel Ryan Murphy stood in the ship's main cargo bay, watching his soldiers prepare their equipment for the mission ahead. Murphy was 43 years old, with gray eyes and scars on his hands that told stories he preferred not to share. He had been commanding the shock battalion for 8 years, and he understood better than anyone what kind of people he led. These were not Earth's finest soldiers in the traditional sense. They were Earth's most effective killers, recruited from places that polite society preferred to forget existed. Each one had volunteered for a unit with a 90% casualty rate, because the alternative was spending the rest of their lives in prison or psychiatric facilities. Sergeant Lisa Park was checking her modified assault rifle near the port, bulkhead. Lisa had earned her rank during the Seoul underground conflicts, where combat took place in flooded subway tunnels with improvised weapons and no backup. She was 28 years old, with short black hair and the kind of quiet competence that came from surviving fights that should have killed her. Park, what's your assessment of the alien tactical data? Murphy asked as he approached her position. Lisa looked up from her weapon maintenance. The Vorthak fight like machines, Colonel. They're predictable, logical, and efficient. They've probably never encountered an enemy that uses human wave tactics or improvised explosives. And your recommendation? We don't fight their war. We fight our war and make them adapt to our rules. Lisa smiled, and it was the expression of someone who had learned to find humor in hopeless situations. These aliens are about to discover why Earth's military developed the concept of urban warfare. Corporal Ben Cross was assembling what the Yedom weapons manual described as a kinetic impact device, but which looked suspiciously like a high-tech sledgehammer. Ben had been a professional boxer before joining the military, with 47 wins and 3 kills in sanctioned matches. He was built like a tank, with massive shoulders and hands that could crush steel. "Cross, you understand the mission parameters?" Murphy asked. Ben looked up from his improvised weapon and grinned. "We're going to save some aliens from robot bullies, and we're going to do it by hitting things very hard in places they don't expect." "That's the most accurate mission summary I've heard yet," Murphy admitted. Private Amy Clark was sitting alone near the starboard wall, cleaning a pistol that had been modified beyond any manufacturer's recognition. Amy was the youngest member of the unit at 24, but she had been recruited directly from death row after eliminating an entire criminal organization that had murdered her family. She was small, quiet, and absolutely lethal in close combat situations. "Amy, you've been studying the ship schematics for the Vorthak vessels. What's your opinion?" Amy looked up with pale blue eyes that seemed to see everything. "They're designed for efficiency, not defense against boarding parties. The maintenance corridors are large enough for human infiltration, and the power systems have obvious vulnerability points. If I can get inside one of their ships, I can take it apart from the inside." Murphy nodded. This was exactly the kind of thinking that made the Shock Battalion effective. Where normal soldiers saw impregnable alien technology, his people saw opportunities for creative destruction. Dr. Helen Ward, the mission's xenobiologist, entered the cargo bay carrying a tablet full of research data. Helen was 36 years old, a civilian scientist who had volunteered for the mission despite having no military training. She studied the soldiers around her with the fascination of someone observing a new species. "Colonel Murphy, I've completed my analysis of the Vorthak behavioral patterns based on the Zaphirian data. What did you find, Doc?" "They're a collective intelligence operating on principles of logical optimization. They make decisions based on mathematical calculations of efficiency and resource allocation. They literally cannot comprehend the concept of sacrifice for non-rational reasons." Murphy smiled. "Good. That means they'll never see us coming." Captain Steve Harrison's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. "All personnel, prepare for hyperspace transition. Estimated time to Zaphirian system, 6 days." As the Retribution entered hyperspace, Colonel Murphy looked around at his soldiers and felt something that might have been pride. These were people that civilized society had written off as monsters and criminals. But they were his monsters, and they were about to prove that sometimes the galaxy needed monsters to fight other monsters. The only question was whether the Vorthak Collective was prepared to meet the kind of enemy that turned desperation into victory and treated impossible odds as a personal challenge. They were about to find out what happened when Earth's outcasts became humanity's heroes. The ES Retribution dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system and immediately detected 17 large metallic objects orbiting the purple planet. Captain Steve Harrison stood on his bridge, watching the tactical display as his sensors gathered information about the alien fleet that was systematically destroying the Zaphirian homeworld. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Carl Jones, the ship's weapons officer. "Look at the size of those things." The Vorthak ships were massive geometric structures that looked like floating metal pyramids, each one larger than Earth's biggest space station. They moved with perfect precision, maintaining exact distances from each other as they deployed smaller craft toward the planet's surface. Even from this distance, the crew of the Retribution could see the orange glow of fires burning across the planet's continents. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the surface," reported Communications Officer Nancy Kim. "It's from the Zaphirian survivors." "Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was weak and filled with static, but the translation software managed to convert it into understandable English. "Unknown vessel, this is Commander Zara of the Zaphirian Resistance. We detect your ship but do not recognize your configuration. Are you here to help us or to watch us die?" Captain Harrison looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. These were good people, scientists and explorers who had volunteered for humanity's first interstellar rescue mission. They knew the odds were hopeless, but they had come anyway. "Commander Zara, this is Captain Steve Harrison of the Earth vessel Retribution. We received your distress call and we're here to help. Please send us tactical information about enemy positions. There was a long pause before the Zaphirian responded. Earth? We have never heard of your species. How many ships do you have? Just one. Another pause. This one even longer. Captain Harrison, our gratitude is beyond words, but one ship cannot defeat 17 Vorthak harvesters. We estimate they have over 300 fighter craft and enough firepower to destroy a moon. Commander, we didn't come here to fight their war. We came here to fight our war. Harrison turned to his tactical officer. Lieutenant Jones, are the packages ready? All 16 packages are loaded and ready for deployment, sir. The packages were not actually escape pods, though they looked identical to the Retribution's standard evacuation craft. Each one contained 2 soldiers from the shock battalion, enough explosives to level a city block, and equipment that had been designed for one purpose: turning a hopeless situation into organized chaos. Colonel Ryan Murphy stood in the ship's cargo bay, watching his soldiers make final preparations for what every military manual would classify as a suicide mission. The plan was simple in concept, but impossible in execution. They would launch toward the planet in what appeared to be escape pods, land behind enemy lines, and begin systematically sabotaging the Vorthak operation from within. Remember, Murphy told his troops, we're not trying to win a conventional battle. We're trying to break their ability to think clearly. These machines operate on logic and efficiency. Our job is to introduce them to the concepts of chaos and random violence. Private Amy Clark sealed her equipment pack and checked her modified pistol one final time. She had been studying the blueprints of Vorthak technology for 6 days, learning how their ships were constructed and where their weak points might be. Amy had grown up in the ruins of Detroit, where survival meant knowing how to break things that seemed unbreakable. Amy, you're targeting the command ship, Murphy said. Your job is to get inside and cause as much damage as possible to their central processing systems. Amy nodded. I understand, Colonel. How long do you need me to keep them distracted? As long as you can manage. Every minute you're causing trouble up there is another minute for the rest of us to work down on the planet. Sergeant Lisa Park was loading her pack with what the inventory listed as improvised urban warfare devices, but which any sane person would recognize as homemade bombs. Lisa had learned her trade in the flooded tunnels beneath Seoul, where the enemy could come from any direction and conventional tactics were useless. Park, you're going after their ground forces, Murphy continued. Find the Zaphirian survivors and teach them how to fight dirty. Yes, sir. Any specific restrictions? On methods? Murphy almost smiled. Private, we're about to introduce an alien species to human warfare. There are no restrictions except try not to blow up any innocent bystanders. Corporal Ben Cross was strapping what looked like a modified construction tool to his back. The device had started life as a magnetic crane designed for moving heavy equipment, but the ship's engineers had turned it into something that could accelerate small objects to hypersonic speeds. Ben had requested ammunition that consisted of pieces of crystalline debris from the Zaphirian cities. Cross, you're handling the processing facilities on the surface. Find their industrial equipment and break it. Ben grinned. Colonel, I've been breaking things professionally for 15 years. These aliens are about to learn why Earth developed the concept of applied violence. The Vorthak fleet detected the Retribution when it moved closer to the planet, but their tactical algorithms classified it as a minimal threat. The ship was clearly inferior technology, and its power output suggested it carried only defensive weapons. 2 fighter craft were dispatched to investigate and destroy the vessel if necessary. Captain Harrison watched the approaching enemy fighters on his display screen. All right, people. Time to introduce the galaxy to human theater. Nancy, broadcast a surrender signal on all frequencies. Sir? Are you sure about this? Asked Lieutenant Jones. Trust me, we want them to think we're giving up. Harrison activated the ship's internal communication system. Colonel Murphy, you're clear for package deployment. The cargo bay doors opened, and 16 objects that looked like standard escape pods launched toward the planet's surface. The Vorthak scanners detected the launches and classified them as evacuation attempts by a defeated crew. The alien tactical computers calculated that the pods posed no military threat, and focused their attention on capturing the main vessel for analysis. They did not realize that each pod contained trained killers who had been taught to turn any environment into a battlefield. Amy Clark's pod was the first to reach its target, impacting the hull of a Vorthak command ship with enough force to breach the outer plating. Amy rolled out of the twisted metal carrying her assault rifle and a backpack full of what she called presents for her hosts. The ship's interior was a maze of geometric corridors lit by cold blue light, and Amy moved through them like a ghost. Theo. Vorthak maintenance drones that encountered her were designed to repair equipment, not fight intruders. Amy eliminated them with controlled bursts of gunfire while she searched for the ship's central processing core. She had studied human computer viruses during her brief time in technical college, and she was curious to see how alien systems would respond to some creative programming. Lisa Park's pod landed in the ruins of a Zaphirian city where massive harvesting machines were processing the wreckage into raw materials. She emerged from the crash site carrying a plasma cutter stolen from the ship's engineering section and began moving through the rubble like she was back in the Seoul underground. The harvesting machines were efficient, but not designed for urban combat against an enemy that used the environment as a weapon. Ben Cross's pod impacted directly on a Vorthak processing facility, and he kicked his way out of the debris carrying his improvised railgun. The facility's automated defenses were designed to repel energy weapons and conventional projectiles. They were not prepared for a former heavyweight boxer who fought like he was still in the ring, using a weapon that fired pieces of crystalline building material at velocities that could punch through starship armor. The Vorthak Collective began to experience something their programming had no reference for. Their tactical models predicted that defeated enemies would either surrender or retreat. They had no algorithms for opponents who responded to overwhelming odds by splitting up and attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. On 17 different fronts, human soldiers were introducing the galaxy to concepts that civilized warfare had never considered. They turned maintenance tunnels into ambush routes, improvised weapons from industrial equipment, and treated impossible odds as a personal challenge rather than a reason to surrender. The machines were about to learn that humans had spent their entire evolutionary history as persistence predators, and they had never learned how to give up. Private Amy Clark moved through the Vorthak command ship like a shadow, her footsteps silent on the metal corridors. The ship's interior was a maze of geometric passages that seemed designed by minds that thought in perfect mathematical patterns. Everything was clean, efficient, and predictable. Amy had grown up in the ruins of Detroit where nothing was predictable, and she knew how to use that knowledge as a weapon. The first maintenance drone she encountered looked like a floating metal box with extending arms. It scanned her with blue light and made electronic sounds that probably meant it was asking questions. Amy answered by putting 3 bullets through its central processing unit and watching it crash to the floor in a shower of sparks. "Sorry, buddy," she whispered as she stepped over the wreckage. "Nothing personal, but you picked the wrong species to mess with." Amy had been studying the ship's layout during her approach, and she knew that Vorthak vessels were built around a central core that controlled all their systems. The aliens thought in terms of efficiency, which meant they put all their important equipment in one place to minimize operational complexity. It was logical, but it was also exactly the kind of thinking that got you killed when fighting humans. She found the central core after 20 minutes of careful movement through the ship's corridors. It was a massive chamber filled with crystalline structures that pulsed with blue light, and Amy could hear the electronic humming of quantum processors working at speeds that hurt her ears. The room was protected by a force field that shimmered, like water, but Amy had expected that. From her backpack, she pulled out a device that looked like a modified television remote control. Dr. Helen Ward had built it using components from the ship's communication system, and it was designed to broadcast specific radio frequencies that would interfere with alien technology. Amy pointed it at the force field and pressed the button. The barrier flickered and disappeared. "Human engineering beats alien efficiency every time," Amy said as she walked into the core chamber. Meanwhile, on the planet's surface, Sergeant Lisa Park was having a conversation with a group of Zaphirian survivors who had been hiding in the underground tunnels beneath their destroyed city. The aliens looked like tall blue humans with 4 arms and large black eyes, and they stared at Lisa with expressions of amazement and terror. "You are from the rescue ship?" asked a Zaphirian, female named Vera, speaking through a translation device that one of the survivors had been carrying. "That's right," Lisa said as she unpacked her equipment. "My name is Lisa, and I'm here to teach you how to fight back against the machines." "But we are not warriors," protested a male Zaphirian named Kel. "Our people have never fought wars. We do not know how to kill." Lisa looked around at the group of frightened civilians and felt something she had not experienced in years. These people reminded her of her own family, who had died in the Soul conflicts while she was learning how to be a soldier. She had not been able to save them, but maybe she could save these people. "You don't need to be warriors," she said gently. "You just need to be angry enough to fight for your families." Lisa began teaching the Zaphirians how to build electromagnetic pulse devices using their own technology. The aliens were surprisingly quick learners, and their natural intelligence made up for their lack of military experience. Within 2 hours, they had constructed 15 devices that could disable Vorthak equipment from a distance. "These machines think in patterns," Lisa explained as she showed them how to plant the devices near enemy positions. "They expect logical behavior from their opponents. But we're going to be illogical. We're going to hit them where they don't expect it and run away before they can respond." Above their heads, Corporal Ben Cross was introducing the Vorthak processing facility to the concept of applied violence. Ben had grown up in Chicago during the corporate wars, where survival meant knowing how to break things that seemed unbreakable. The Vorthak facility was certainly unbreakable by normal standards, but Ben had never been accused of being normal. His improvised railgun fired pieces of crystalline debris at speeds that could punch through tank armor. The facility's defensive systems were designed to repel energy weapons and conventional missiles, but they had never encountered projectiles that moved at hypersonic velocities while following completely random trajectories. "Come on, you metal bastards," Ben shouted as he fired another shot that took out a harvesting robot. "Let's see how efficient you are when someone's shooting your equipment full of holes." The Vorthak tried to respond with their own weapons, but Ben was not where their targeting systems expected him to be. He moved through the facility like he was still in the boxing ring, using footwork and timing that no alien tactical computer could predict. When they shot at where he was, he had already moved to where they were not looking. Private Danny Walsh found himself surrounded by Vorthak drones in what had once been a Zaphirian school. The building was half destroyed, with holes in the walls and rubble scattered across the floor. Danny had been a demolitions expert during the Antarctic mining wars, and he knew how to turn any environment into a weapon. Instead of fighting the drones directly, Danny began dismantling the building's heating system. The Zaphirians used a form of liquid fuel that burned at extremely high temperatures, and the school's heating pipes were full of it. 20 minutes later, Danny had created a flamethrower from heating oil and compressed gas that burned hot enough to melt drone armor. "Welcome to human engineering," he said as he turned the improvised weapon on his attackers. "We've been making things go boom for 10,000 years. But it was Amy Clark who changed everything." Deep inside the Vorthak command ship, Amy had discovered something that Dr. Ward's briefings had not prepared her for. The alien central processing cores were not just connected to their own ships. They were linked by quantum entanglement across the entire fleet, sharing information and tactical data in real time. Amy realized that damage to one core would affect the entire network's efficiency. She began placing explosive charges at critical points in the crystalline structure, using techniques she had learned during her brief career as a criminal in Detroit's underground. The Vorthak had built their system for maximum efficiency, which meant they had created a single point of failure that could bring down their entire operation. "Time to introduce you guys to the concept of cascading system failure," Amy said as she armed the charges. The explosion that followed sent quantum feedback through the Vorthak communication network. Ships that had been operating with machine precision suddenly found their coordination disrupted. Tactical algorithms that had been running flawlessly for centuries began producing errors and contradictions. On the surface of the planet, Lisa Park watched as the Vorthak harvesting machines began moving in confused patterns, their perfect formation breaking apart as their control signals became unreliable. The Zaphirian civilians she had been training looked at her with expressions of amazement. "What did you do?" asked Vera. "We didn't do anything," Lisa said with a smile. "But I bet Amy just gave their computer network a very bad day." Ben Cross noticed the change too. The processing facility's defensive systems began targeting their own equipment, confused by contradictory commands from the damaged command network. Ben took advantage of the chaos to plant explosive charges at the facility's power core, using the opportunity to cause maximum damage to the alien infrastructure. Dr. Helen Ward, monitoring the battle from the dying Retribution, watched her instruments detect massive disruptions in Vorthak communication patterns. The aliens' response times were slowing dramatically, and their tactical adaptations were becoming increasingly erratic. "Colonel Murphy," she reported over the communication system, "I think they're having what humans would call a nervous breakdown." Colonel Murphy, who was currently using a piece of Vorthak equipment as a club to smash through a bulkhead, laughed grimly. "Doc, they haven't seen anything yet. We're just getting started." The Vorthak collective was experiencing something their logical minds could not process. They had encountered enemies before, but never an opponent that responded to overwhelming odds by becoming more dangerous, rather than less. The human soldiers were not behaving according to any rational tactical model. They were fighting like the persistence predators they had evolved to be, turning every setback into an opportunity and every disadvantage into a weapon. The machines were learning that sometimes the most dangerous enemy was the one that had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The Vorthak collective made their final mistake when they tried to understand human behavior through the lens of logical thinking. Their quantum processors worked frantically to analyze the chaos that 12 human soldiers had introduced into their perfect operation. Every calculation led to the same impossible conclusion. The humans should have surrendered or retreated when faced with overwhelming odds. But humans had spent millions of years as persistence hunters, chasing prey across endless distances until exhaustion claimed their targets. They had learned that victory often belonged not to the strongest or fastest, but to the one who refused to give up. The Vorthak were about to receive a practical lesson in this evolutionary truth. Corporal Maria Santos and Private Kevin Brown had been working together for 6 hours to reach the main Vorthak command ship. Maria was a demolitions expert who had learned her trade during the wars in South America, where she had blown up everything from bridges to orbital defense platforms. Kevin was a former computer hacker whose criminal skills had been redirected toward military purposes after he was caught breaking into government databases. They made an unusual team, but they understood each other perfectly. Both had grown up in places where survival meant being smarter and more ruthless than everyone else around you. "Kevin, how much time do you need to upload your virus?" Maria asked as they crawled through a maintenance tunnel toward the ship's central core. "Give me 5 minutes once we reach the main computer system," Kevin replied, checking the portable device he had been building during their approach. "This little beauty is going to replace their tactical algorithms with every piece of human military history I could download. Sun Tzu, Napoleon, Patton, and about 50 urban warfare manuals." Maria smiled as she armed the explosive charges she had been carrying. "And I'm going to make sure they don't have time to debug your program." The central core of the command ship was a massive chamber filled with processing equipment that hummed with quantum energy. The Vorthak had built it to be the brain of their entire fleet operation, a single point where all decisions were made and all tactics were coordinated. It was brilliantly efficient and absolutely perfect. It was also exactly the kind of target that human military doctrine was designed to destroy. "Maria, this is beautiful," Kevin said as he began connecting his device to the alien computer system. "They put all their important systems in one place to maximize efficiency. It's like they never heard of the concept of redundancy." "How long until your virus takes effect?" Maria asked while she placed explosive charges around the chamber's supporting structures. "It's already working. Look at those displays." Kevin pointed to screens around the chamber that were flickering with error messages in alien script. "Their tactical programs are trying to process human military strategy, and it's causing logical conflicts throughout their entire network." On the planet's surface, the effects of Kevin's virus were becoming obvious to everyone fighting the battle. Sergeant Lisa Park watched as Vorthak harvesting machines began attacking each other, confused by contradictory orders from their command network. The Zaphirian civilians she had been training stared in amazement as their oppressors destroyed their own equipment. "Lisa, what is happening to them?" asked Vera, the Zaphirian female who had become the leader of the civilian resistance. "Human computer science," Lisa replied with satisfaction. "My friend Kevin just taught their machines how to think like humans. The problem is that human thinking doesn't make sense to logical minds." Corporal Ben Cross was having the time of his life at the Vorthak processing facility. The alien defensive systems were now targeting random objects, including several of their own harvesting robots. Ben took advantage of the chaos to plant explosive charges throughout the facility, turning the aliens' own industrial equipment against them. This is what happens when you mess with a species that learned warfare from 10,000 years of killing each other, Ben said as he triggered another explosion that brought down a processing tower. Private Danny Walsh had managed to connect with a group of Zaphirian engineers who had been hiding in the ruins of their technology center. Together, they were building electromagnetic pulse devices that could disable Vorthak equipment from a safe distance. The aliens were quick learners, and their natural scientific ability made them excellent students in the art of creative destruction. "Danny, we have built 12 more devices," reported Kell, the Zaphirian engineer who had become Danny's unofficial assistant. "Where should we place them?" "Target their communication arrays," Danny said, pointing to the alien installations scattered across the city. "If we can cut their ships off from each other, they'll start making mistakes." But it was Amy Clark who had discovered the key to defeating the entire Vorthak fleet. Deep inside the command ship's computer core, Amy had found something that changed her understanding of the enemy they were fighting. The Vorthak were not just machines. They were a collective consciousness that shared thoughts and experiences across their entire network. When one ship learned something, all ships learned it instantly. When one ship was damaged, all ships felt the pain. Amy realized that the explosive charges she had placed were not just destroying equipment, they were causing psychological trauma to a species that had never experienced individual mortality. "You guys have never been alone, have you?" Amy said to the empty chamber as she armed her final charges. "You've never had to face death by yourself." The explosion that destroyed the command ship's central core sent more than just quantum feedback through the Vorthak network. It sent something the collective consciousness had never experienced: the knowledge of individual death, learned from the mind of a human soldier who had faced mortality every day of her life. The surviving Vorthak ships began to panic. For a species that had always existed as part of a collective mind, the sudden introduction of human concepts like individual fear and personal mortality was devastating. Ships that had operated with perfect coordination for centuries suddenly found themselves questioning their own existence and purpose. Captain Steve Harrison watched from the bridge of the dying Retribution as the Vorthak fleet began to retreat in disorder. Several ships were firing randomly into space, their crews apparently convinced that enemies were everywhere. Others had stopped moving entirely, as if their crews were paralyzed by thoughts they could not process. "Nancy, open a channel to all frequencies," Harrison ordered. "Channel open, sir." Harrison looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They had volunteered for a mission that every logical analysis said was impossible, and they had succeeded by being completely illogical. "This is Captain Steve Harrison of the Earth Alliance ship Retribution to any alien vessels receiving this transmission. You came to this system to harvest a peaceful species. Instead, you discovered that monsters live in the dark between stars. The remaining Vorthak ships were attempting to retreat to hyperspace, but they found their path blocked by the Retribution. Harrison's ship was falling apart, with hull breaches in 23 places and most systems failing. But it was positioned directly in the hyperspace exit vector. We are those monsters," Harrison continued. "We come from a small blue planet that most of you will never find, and we have a simple message for the galaxy. We do not forgive those who prey on the innocent. We do not accept surrender from those who show no mercy, and we will travel any distance to answer the call for help." The final Vorthak ship attempted to ram the Retribution rather than face the psychological horror that the humans had introduced into their collective consciousness. The collision destroyed both vessels in a flash of light that could be seen from the planet's surface. When the explosions faded, the Zaphirian homeworld was free. The rescue ships that arrived 3 days later found something unprecedented in galactic history. The Vorthak fleet, which had seemed invincible, had been destroyed by a single human vessel and 12 soldiers. The Zaphirian survivors emerged from their hiding places to find their world liberated by a species they had never heard of. The humans had left behind only scattered equipment and a simple message carved into the crystal walls of the main Zaphirian city. From Earth, with love. Try not to need rescuing again. But across the galaxy, the story spread through every communication network and trading post. Somewhere in the vast darkness between stars was a species that had heard a cry for help and answered it with monsters. They called themselves humans, and they had introduced the galaxy to concepts that no civilized mind had ever imagined. They had shown that sometimes the most dangerous enemy was the one that fought not for conquest or resources, but for the simple principle that innocent people should not be allowed to die alone. The galaxy would never forget the day that Earth's monsters became its heroes.